Megan Berg. I'd like to introduce her a little bit. She is a just recently passed 4-H Youth Development Extension agent from Prowers County. We unfortunately just lost her. She's got a pretty cool gig going now. She's got years of experience raising, exhibiting, and managing market goats and market goat shows. And she's currently working for Legacy Livestock Imaging. So I'm sure she can give you a little more information once we let her go. But thank you, Megan, and I will hand it over to you, and I will let you know as things come into the chat box.
Perfect. Yes, as Kenzie said, my name is Megan, and I have been, and I was trying to do the math earlier today, and I believe I have been in the goat industry for 18 years now. I started out with a catch-it goat in Weld County and started my herd from 7 wethers and 1 doe. And my herd grew when I was in high school. I had 80 head, over 80 head. We've whittled that back down. My parents now still run the goats. We've whittled it down. We're right around 30 head. And we do a lot more with the breeding side of things now versus the market. We do still sell some market wethers to 4-H families and that kind of thing. But that's kind of how I got my start, was a catch-it project, and I really didn't have a clue what I was doing. So that's what this presentation is designed for, is for you guys that got into this project without really knowing what you got yourself into. So I'm going to help go over some of that kind of stuff. Nope, hold on. There we go. All right. So very first thing with your goat project, the most important things to know are when your spring weigh-in is, which this year is a little bit unique. A lot of counties, I don't know what Adams County is doing, Kenzie, but a lot of counties are going to a nomination process versus an actual weigh-in just because of the COVID stuff. But regardless, spring weigh-in is really important, because if you don't get those animals weighed in the spring, you don't get to show at fair time. It's also important to know when your fair weigh-in is. Like Kenzie said, I was a former 4-H agent. I did have a kid miss fair weigh-in. So it's important to know when that is. If you have any idea that you want to go to State Fair or any of the other big majors like Exarban or out to Kansas City or that type of even stock show, it's important to know when those deadlines for nominations are. So that's the first thing. The other thing that your spring weigh-in and your fair weigh-in dates can help you learn or help you figure is your rate of gain and your feed efficiency on your animal. Rate of gain is how many pounds of feed you're putting into an animal for them to gain 1 pound. And then your feed efficiency is basically how efficient of an eater are they? Are they wasting a lot of product, or are they eating everything up and using it efficiently to gain that poundage? So those are a couple of important things that you can learn from the days between your spring and your fair weigh-in. It is really weird, Kenzie, to teach online.
It's a little rough, yep, because you can't really see the kids' reactions and stuff. So yeah, you're doing great. I know it's rough for everybody all around. It's a learning curve.
Thanks. All right, so when we get started with our animal, it's important to keep our animals in a clean, dry, well-ventilated place. We want to do that because we can reduce the amount of disease and the amount of stress on an animal. If animals are stressed or diseased, they're less likely to gain weight or perform well for you. So you want to keep them in a comfortable place. Just like you want a nice clean bed to get into, you want them to have a nice clean bed to get into. You want these animals to be able to get out of the weather. You don't want them just standing out in a hailstorm. Market goats typically need 10 to 20 feet of room per animal. When I was a kid, we built all kinds of things for the goats to climb on. One year we built an A-frame that actually went over the fence, and we had them their food on one side and their water on the other, so that they were forced to go over this A-frame. But that helped them build muscle. It also, goats are weird. They like to lay on top of things. So they liked laying on top of the A-frame during the day versus down on the ground. So just some thoughts. The other thing that we used were old, any of the dads in the audience, old cable spools, wood cable spools. A lot of companies, they don't want them. So you can usually pick them up for next to nothing or nothing at all, and throw them out there. Make sure you cover the holes in the top of them. We did have one get its leg stuck and broke it one year. But those also make great things for the goats to, again, they like to climb on them and they like to lay on top of them.
Megan, real quick, I'm sorry to interrupt. Are you comfortable with us being able to share a PDF of these slides with the participants afterwards?
Sure. Yeah, that's totally fine.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. All right. So when it comes to cleaning, my mom was a little bit of a clean freak. We were to clean our pens once a week, and the water buckets and the feed buckets got cleaned out every day. That is important to clean those pens as often as you can, because one, your buildup isn't as bad. I learned this as a child. If you clean them once a week, there's not as much there. You don't have to move out as much. It makes for a much more happy Saturday for everybody. But the buildup, there's not as much buildup there, but there's also not as many flies and mosquitoes around, because there's not all of that waste that those flies and mosquitoes like to lay their eggs in. The water buckets and the feed buckets, the water should be clean, fresh water. If we got a really windy day when we were kids, we would go out and dump the buckets in the morning and dump them in the afternoon just to keep the dirt out of them, because they don't like to drink that just like we don't. And goats are super picky. They will not eat feed typically that's a day old. So if they've left something behind in their bucket or their bunk, dump it out. Don't just pour your feed over the top of it, because they won't eat it. They're kind of like a cat. They're just picky. So that was one thing we've learned through trial and error, is to go ahead and clean those feed bunks out as often as you can. All right. So when we look at our animals, it's important. This is one of the first things I learned when I went through vet science in 4-H. It's important to know when our animals don't feel good, because if we, just like you guys, if you don't feel good, you want to get to feeling better as quickly as you can. So if we know those signs right away and can get them treated right away, then we can get them back on the road to recovery and being able to convert that feed and putting on pounds of product to be able to be a good animal come fair time. So the telltale signs that an animal is not doing well is they're not eating. Now, granted, I just said on the last slide, sometimes goats won't clean up all of their feed, especially if it gets a little bit wet. But if they are not touching their feed at all, that's a good indicator that something's wrong. Their ears are droopy or their tails are droopy. Goats will tuck their tails up against their bodies when they don't feel good. Their eyes look dull, just like you guys. They appear depressed, so they may go off in a corner and lay by themselves. They may not want to be a part of the group. Of course, a cough and nasal discharge are always good indicators. I am not sure what I spelled. I must have spelled that wrong and never noticed it. Anyway, and then if they're running a fever. So goats typically, their average temperature is 101 to 102, which is a lot higher. For me, I started out in 4-H as a horse kid, and horses' temperatures are not that high. So being a horse kid, I immediately panicked when my goat had a temperature that high, and then we did some research. So 101 to 102 is a normal temperature range for a goat. Their respiration rate should be 8 to 18 breaths per minute. So if they're breathing really hard, that might be a good indication that something is wrong. Something that my vet taught me when I was a kid is if an animal has a nasal discharge that is clear, it's likely dust or some sort of allergen in the air. But if it has some sort of color to it, they're actually sick. So when you see something like that and you're not sure, it's always a good idea to ask a vet. But the vet said when it becomes colored, that's when you really have to get worried. Goats are really prone to pneumonia, especially in the spring of the year because it's hot, cold, hot, cold, hot, cold. So you want to make sure you're watching those animals that are coughing or having a lot of nasal discharge because it could lead to pneumonia eventually. All right. So when you treat your animal, I know some of you dads and some of you moms in the audience have been around animals for a long time and have treated animals a long time. But for those of you guys that have not, make sure you check with your vet before you give an animal anything. They went to school for this. They're not going to steer you wrong. Make sure you guys, a lot of our project manuals, I talk about it like I'm still in extension. A lot of the project manuals in 4-H talk about a vet-patient relationship. You want to make sure that you're having a good relationship with your vet. You also want to make sure that you are going to a vet who is a large animal specialist. Dog and cat vets are not going to be able to help you, unfortunately. So goats are a little bit odd. Our vet, we were kind of a test run, if you will. Our vet didn't know what to do with the goats because we were one of the only ones in the county at the time that had them. So we were kind of the guinea pigs, but you want to make sure that you get in contact with somebody that at least knows something about large animals, and it's even better if they know something about goats. The goats are becoming more prominent in the industry. I'm aging myself a little bit in that I started the goats somewhere in the early 2000s, and they were pretty new to the whole show industry. Now they're pretty commonplace, so a lot more of the vets, especially the ones coming out of school, they've had a little more practice with them. The other thing, for you Adams County kids, Kenzie just did an MQA, and all of you should go through an MQA program. I know this year is very weird. We aren't having our traditional MQA programs like we would normally do. But make sure because there's a lot of information that you can glean from those programs. But the biggest thing I can tell you guys is the importance of paying attention to a withdrawal time. If the vet asks you or comes out and gives something to your animal, you need to make sure you ask what the withdrawal time is on it, because that animal cannot go to be harvested until all of that drug is out of their system. This is especially important during or closer to fair time, because you don't want to get to fair time and something not be out of their system. They get on the truck, go to the plant, and then you'd be in trouble. So biggest thing, I always calculate an extra full day when we do a withdrawal time, just as a safety net. I know at one point, if you gave the shot in the AM, you had to wait until the AM the next. Just wait the full extra day, okay? All right, so some good resources for the goat project. The Ohio State manual, even though it has some dairy and some fiber goat stuff in there, it's still a really good project manual. Slightly outdated, like I said, I think it's the same manual from when I was a kid, but it still has some good information. Texas A&M, their goat and sheep extension unit, they go like them on Facebook because they are constantly putting videos out or articles or all kinds of things. And then the Boar Goat magazine by the American Boar Goat Association, they have, especially around kidding time, if any of you guys are breeders or thinking about breeding, their kidding issue is usually a good issue. because it has all kinds of troubleshooting. Oh, so-and-so had this happen, and this is what, this is what they did. My mom has a stack of articles that she's pulled out over the years out of that Borgo magazine. All right. So for you kiddos, this is, especially you young ones, this is something that a judge in showmanship likes to ask a lot. They like to ask about the parts of your animal. And if I were a judge, and I would know that you were a good showman if you knew all about your animal. That includes the parts. A lot of times they will ask where the loin is. I don't know, can you guys see my mouse? Yeah, okay. They will ask where the loin is. The loin is from the 13th rib, which if we had ribs, the 13th rib to where the hook is, or the hip bone. So if you go outside, it's kind of cold. You guys in northern Colorado have like a foot of snow on the ground. But if you go outside and look at your goats, you will be able to feel that space. So they'll ask where the loin is. They might ask where the rack is, which is the same as the ribs. Rack is more of an end product term versus live animal, but rack is a common one. Hooks and pins, which hooks or your hip bone right here and your pin bone here. I've been asked where the hock is. So that's kind of like our elbow or our knee joint. I've been asked where the cannon bone is. So that would be like our forearm. The pastern, which is kind of like our wrist. Let's see. Heart girth, I have been asked that before. That's this right along here, right where their leg up to the top of their shoulder. I have been asked where the shoulder is. And I think that's it. Everything else is pretty self-explanatory. So this actually came from the American Boar Goat Association. So this is a good one to study off of. I realize it's a buck, it's not a wether, but the parts are all still there. Okay, so this is a good thing for you guys to have to study. Juniors, parts are really, really common questions. Seniors, seniors and intermediates, you will get more difficult questions. Ideally, you will have grown in your knowledge, but juniors, this is really good for you guys. Okay, now we're going to talk about selection. So when we go out to select I need to quit playing with my mouse. When we go out to select our animal, one of the first things that I learned is to walk into a pen and see what animal catches your eye first. Regardless, good, bad, or indifferent. Which animal catches your eye first? And then once we've decided what animal or couple of animals, because sometimes there's a couple, then we can start kind of picking them apart. I know for some of you guys that have not maybe been, I was not a livestock judger. I was a horse judger. The mechanics are the kind of similar, but I do have a little bit of judging background. But for someone who has never looked at an animal before, it can be hard to tell a good one from a bad one. And a good one, are they going to stay good all the way through their career? So some good indicators of a good one, and a good one at a young age, is the bone size. So we want a nice heavy bone, circumference of bone, because if we're heavy boned when we're a baby, we're going to be able to carry the extra pounds that we gain over our lifetime. We're going to be able to carry that better than something that's got a little tiny bone. Okay? We're going to look at our length of our cannon bone, which if we go back to this slide, our cannon bone's right here and right here. So between your knee and your pastern joint and your hock and your pastern joint, we're going to look at that length because that will tell us potentially how tall an animal is going to be. Something with a longer cannon bone, it's going to be a little bit taller. Something with a shorter cannon bone, probably not going to be very tall. The industry right now is looking for animals that have a lot of bone and are not tall, super, super tall, but not super, super short either. When I first started, everybody wanted these kind of almost lamb looking things. They were super tall and no bone and super tubular made. And then we went to these little bitty short things. They were like this big and built like a box. And now the industry is kind of leveled out, kind of like any of you dads or moms, the cattle industry, where we went from these giant things to these little bitty things. Now the industry's kind of figured itself out. So looking for a lot of bone, something that's moderate in its frame size. So not super big, not super little. And then we want to look at the levelness of the top line and the angle of the shoulder. Whoops, angle of the shoulder, this way. So on this guy, we have a nice level top line, and our shoulder lays nicely back into our top line. So when you think about an animal, you want those animals to be put together so that they, ideally, all of their parts put together really well so that they walk correctly. If their shoulders kick too far forward, they're gonna walk on their tippy toes. If their shoulder is laid too far back, they're gonna sit back on their haunches too much. So you want a nice level top line, nice angle to the shoulder. You want some spring of rib, especially any of you guys that get into the doe side of thing. You really want the spring of rib because of the capacity. You want those mamas to be able to have their babies in their belly and still be able to breathe. But spring of rib in a wether, you don't want them super flat-sided, because if they're flat-sided, then there's not a lot of product there. You want, oops, stop touching your, sorry. You want a nice, wide, long, and deep loin. So we talked about the loin, and this is exactly, I don't know if you guys can, this is exactly how I would measure a loin, okay? So my ribs are here on my fingers, pew, pew. And then my thumbs would be at the hips, and then I would be able to go across like this to see how wide it is. And you guys, I hope that you guys get to experience animals that are bigger than your hand, because that is one of the coolest feelings in the world, is to experience an animal that is wider than your hand. And then you would go and you would kind of poke the skin in, and you would be able to feel how deep that loin is, okay? Then we want some fullness of muscle. So we want to make sure these are meat animals. We want to make sure that there's meat on their bones. So we want to make sure that there's muscle there. You don't want them to be like a long distance runner. You don't want their muscle to be long and stringy. You want it to be more like a wrestler, to where they're kind of stacked on muscle. And then you want good feet and legs. Regardless, market animals, breeding animals, doesn't matter. You want good feet and legs, because if they can't travel to food or water, they're not going to grow properly. I realize that we're not in the hill country of Texas where animals are kicked out in the mesquite trees, and hopefully they live. You guys probably have your animals in your backyard or in a smaller space, so they're not having to go that far, but you still want them to be able to travel. You also want, when a judge is looking at an animal, you want those animals to travel well for that judge, okay? All right, oh, this was my one that I was going to actually use. So this guy, he's got a nice laid back shoulder, okay? He also, something we talk about in the breeding industry and a little bit in the market, you want them real clean fronted. You don't want this to be super, this is their brisket and their chest plate. You don't want that to be super fat. You don't want a bunch of just junk there. Animals put fat on front to back, top to bottom. So a good indicator, and we'll talk about this later, a good indicator of finish If an animal is really super heavy in their front end and not super heavy in their back end, they're probably not done yet. They're probably not ready to go to harvest, okay? So he's nice, he's clean through his head. Oddly enough, the weather deal, they do like him pretty. You don't want just an ugly headed thing, especially in the breeding industry. We really want them pretty. So nice slope to our shoulder, nice top line, full hip, some circumference of bone here. He's not going to be super, super tall, but he's not going to be short either. He's got a nice length of cannon bone. All right, so this is what a show ring judge is going to look for. They're going to look for, in the market industry, they're going to look for muscle because we're raising pounds of product. They're going to look for the correctness of finish, which, like I just talked about, animals put that finish on front to back, top to bottom. So they're going to look at where that finish has stopped. Structural correctness. So we want to make sure that their bones are put together right. Balance and eye appeal. So a former judging coach told me that how they explain balance was the animal put together by a committee, or was the animal put together by one person? If the animal was put together by one person, all of their parts are going to flow, just like this guy. All his parts all fit together. If they're put together by a committee, they probably are kind of goofy looking. And then soundness of movement. We want to make sure those animals are moving correctly. So when we look at muscle, our best indicators, and these are kids, these are typically where a judge is going to touch an animal. Some judges, I will tell you, as odd as it is, some judges don't touch animals at all. They just do it on a profile and just looking at them. Especially when you get to some of the bigger shows, they just flat don't have time to go through and touch every animal. But most judges, when they're at the county fair level, they will likely touch the animals. So we're going to touch we're going to check how much is here in their forearm, across their rack, which is their ribs, down their loin, over their hip, and in their leg. So kind of their butt cheeks almost. So we're going to, right here in our forearm, we're going to come down the ribs because you want to be able to feel how much is over the ribs, how much of it is muscle and how much of it is fat. Over the loin, down the hip, and then into this leg. So if there's any crossover lamb kids, leg of lamb, you don't typically have leg of goat as a cut, but these are the money cuts back here. Everything from right here back, all of that is a money cut on any animal. So you want to make sure your pound of product is here. All right, so finish indicators. Like I said, animals front to back, top to bottom. So when a judge is looking for a finish on an animal, they're going to look in their chest to see if they're really heavy chested. I always think about cattle when I think about this, because I've seen some cattle that are really heavy in their brisket and they're bow-legged because of how heavy they are in their brisket. Their forerib, over the ribs. So their forerib is kind of almost like their armpit, if you will. Flank, and then the hind leg. So right here through the brisket and the chest plate, over the ribs. This is your forerib right in here. Especially in the breeding side of things, judges will check this because does will deposit fat in their armpits for whatever reason. And then here in their flank, they also deposit fat in their flank. I don't know why. And then back through this hindquarter area. Kenzie, are we doing okay with questions?
We are. There was one back from health, so I can read that to you now, or we can save it for a little bit later. But that's where we're sitting with questions, and we're about at your 15-minute mark to start asking for questions at the end.
Okay, sounds good. Good Lord, that flew by.
I know.
Okay,
15,
I'll just keep
20
going so I
minutes.
can get
You're
through
doing
all of
good.
this. We may not get to our judging class, which is okay.
15 to 20 minutes. You're doing okay.
Okay, so like we talked about growth indicators, we're gonna look at the top or the length of that cannon bone, how tall they are at the shoulder. So if they're really stubby to the ground as a baby, even if they're really stubby to the ground as a market animal at fair, length of body, and then their weight, of course. So cannon bone and the top of their shoulder, how tall they are, and then the length of their body. You don't want short-sighted stuff, but you don't want them looking like they have an extra vertebrae, okay? All right, then structural correctness, like we talked about, proper angle to the shoulder, set to the pastern. Set to the pastern is really important. That's their wrist bone. You want the cushion, but you don't want them so soft that their dew claws are dragging on the ground. And you don't want them so straight that there's no flex there, because that is one that flexes a lot, okay? Levelness of top line, angle from hooks to pins. This is especially important in breeding animals, because that's where the birth canal is, and you don't want that to be super pinched. But in a market animal, the angle to their hooks, from their hooks to their pins, and the set to their tail can be an indicator that they're maybe not as full in their hip. So if they're really steep, look like a ski slope, and their tail set really low, they maybe don't have as big of a hip as something that has a nice tail set and there's not as steep of an angle there. Angle to the hock, again, that's a traveling thing. You want some flex there, but not so soft that they're almost sickle hawked looking. Oh, there's my horse judging coming out. And then heaviness of bone. And it's important to know where your animal's structural faults are, so sometimes you can get away with showing them out of them. And that's something, especially you little guys, will learn as you go along. Pay attention to what the judge says. If he's a little bit weak behind his shoulders, you can show that out of them. You just have to ask questions of how to do that. So balance and eye appeal, you want them to look proportional. So if we go to this guy, this third and this third and this third are all the same. We don't have a whole bunch of difference in him. You want them to look trim. You don't want them to have a bunch of extra skin hanging here in their throat latch, in through their brisket and their breastplate. You don't want them to look super fat in their bellies. For you guys, I hope all of you hang with us for the nutrition piece of it, but goats get really fat bellies on hay. So you have to be really careful feeding hay to goats. They're a ruminant animal, so you still need to feed them a little bit, but don't make that their only diet. Otherwise, they're gonna look like they ate a bunch of popcorn and have a big old pot belly, okay? Soundness of movement, again, this is an indicator that all of their parts fit together correctly. Their movement should not be labored. And when they're tracking, their hind foot should fall where the front foot just left, so that you know that the parts all fit together, okay? All right, do we want to go, where are we at, Kenzie?
We're doing good. We've still got 10 to 15 minutes before we got to think about hopping off. You do have, is this a good time where I can read just a couple quick questions?
Yep.
So we have one from back a little while ago. This was in response to the health stuff. Their question is, in cold mornings, their goat from last year had a cough in the mornings. only and had hay nasal discharge. So could that be sickness? And they're saying it started happening after their fair.
Okay, cold mornings after fair. So animals, I will tell you, animals are prone to pick up everything under the sun at fair. So make sure if you're bringing them home after fair and they're not going to be processed right away, we always give them a shot of B vitamins just to kind of help boost their immune system. But like I said, animals pick up a whole bunch of stuff after fair. Just like us, animals don't like cold mornings either. If the cough was really super raspy, it could have been an indication of being sick. But if they were on some dry shavings or some dry straw, it could have been just the dust that was bothering them. So without seeing, I guess, the living conditions, that would be what I would say. But if you guys ever feel like your animal's not doing well, call the vet. The last thing you want to do is think, oh, he'll be okay. And then we've done that enough times and then gone out and it was dead the next morning. So if you think something is wrong, even just give the vet a phone call. Here's what I think. And most of the time the vet can be able to diagnose things over the phone.
Great. And then just real quick, somebody was saying they're hoping to hear what to look for in the young kids. So maybe that's something as they're judging this class, you can point out what those goats might have looked like as they were younger. And then Cadence, your question as far as shearing your goat or clipping your goat, that I believe we will cover next week because we're going into fitting and handling next week. So that's Tuesday. So hopefully you can hop in for that. And then we do have questions on good weights at fair or problem gaining weight. And then one more thing that you might be able to address is in this class that you're about to show us is, can you explain the correct tail set a little bit more and the importance of the twist?
Yep. Okay. So there was one question that I could have answered right away.
Good.
And it's now
good
left
weight at fair.
Weight at fair. Yes. Typically you want animals, or the industry standard is to have animals between 80 and 90 pounds. That is typically your high end of your medium weights up into your heavy weights, depending on what your limit for fair is. But 80 to 90 pounds, those animals are typically finished at that point. Finish also depends on frame size. So something that is 80 to 90 pounds and has a really small frame is going to look like junk because it's too heavy. That's too much for their frame. Whereas, so think about it, someone who is 5'2" and weighs 150 pounds is going to look a lot heavier than someone that is 5'6". No, let's go 6 foot and 150 pounds. All going to grow up. So 80 to 90 pounds. Once you break that 100-pounder mark, they're probably too heavy. The one at the grand champion goat at state fair this year did actually do pretty well. I mean, he won, and he was over 100 pounds, but he was a big boy and he had a big frame size to fit it. Okay. I hope that answers somebody's question. Okay. I don't know if we're going to run out of time or not, but I do have a class to show you guys. And I'm going to kind of give you about 30 seconds, maybe not even 30 seconds, a slide, to be able to actually, let's see, stop share. Let's see if I can share screen. Okay. Can you see this, Kenzie? Okay. All right. So as we're going along, so the first question we had about tail set, and these weathers are terrible to show it on. because none of them have their tails up. But what I'm talking about tail set, this guy's probably the best. See how our hooks here and our pin here, it's not a really steep angle, so it makes his hip look nice and round. Whereas this guy's a little more of a steep angle, so his hip kind of looks like an ice cream cone, okay? Does that make some sort of sense? This guy's tail is, and I know it's really hard on a video, this guy's tail is set slightly lower than this guy. It would help if their tails were up. We would be able to actually see what their tail set looked like. But if it doesn't look right to you guys, if you just kind of cock your head and go, that doesn't look right, it's probably not right, okay? So we're gonna go through this class, and Kenzie, if you see something, I don't know how many of you guys have judged before, but what we're gonna do is go through, it's a 6.5 minute video. Then you guys will be able to mark, quote unquote, mark your cards. So put them in some sort of order between the 4 of them. And then if there's any questions in the end, we can figure that out, okay? So I'm gonna let this play. With its awesome music. So this would be something that this is how your judge is gonna look. For any of you that are brand new to the industry, this is some of the angles that your judge is gonna look at. Granted, these judging kids are not doing a great job of getting these animals shown off, but this is how, through a judge's eye, if you will. Guess not. So I'm going to stop this just a second. This guy is a good indicator of an animal that does not feel good. His eyes are pretty dull. His ears are droopy. They all have their tails tucked, but he's kind of humped up. This guy, I would imagine, does not. If we were looking at them in real life, he probably doesn't feel good.
Megan, do you want a couple questions while kids are watching, or do you want them to be able to focus on the video right now and really look at those animals?
We could do a couple of questions.
Alrighty. So we did have kind of 2 of more or less opposite questions. So we had one person ask, what happens if you have a goat that has problem gaining weight? And then on the other side of that, somebody was asking, what is a good way, the best way for them to lose weight?
Okay, so the best way to lose weight is be conscious of your ration, how much you're giving them. And kids, a judge sometimes will ask you guys, how much are you feeding your goat a day? Don't give the answer of a coffee can. That's cute when the peewees do it. but you guys are more intelligent than that. So pay attention to how much of your ration, pay attention to whether or not they're cleaning it up or not. As far as losing weight, exercise. We used to run ours down the road. It was a mile roughly, depending on which stop sign we stopped at. But exercise is the best way for them to lose weight, and just not pouring the feed to them. If you get a little bitty guy in the spring of the year, pour the feed to them. Let them have as much as they want and let them grow. If you have an animal that won't gain weight, first of all, worm them. They may have a worm infestation in their bellies, and those worms are eating all the food and they're not getting any of it. Second, make sure your feed doesn't have a lot of fines in it. Goats are super picky. They don't like all those little itty bitty fines that are at the bottom of the feed bag. If your bag, you open it and there's a ton of fines in there, don't feed it. Take the bag back to the feed store, get a new bag, because they're not going to eat it. If they are still not eating, still not gaining weight, talk to the vet for one, but also try switching up your feed. Some animals just flat don't like the way things taste. I don't like Brussels sprouts. If I was fed a diet of Brussels sprouts, I'm not going to gain any weight. So I guess pay attention to your animal's feed on both ends of the spectrum. What else you got, Kenzie?
Well, we got kids already placing goats for you.
Okay.
So that's exciting, but I do believe that was the rest of the questions we needed to address. There was that you did address the correct tail set, but they did ask about the importance of the twist.
Oh, yes. So this, and it's hard to see. So the importance of the twist, if this guy had his tail up, if this guy had his tail up, the twist is from where his rectum is to the bottom where these two muscles start to flare. There's a line there. When you guys go to clip, you'll be able to see that line. But that's just, think about it like your bicep and your tricep. That's just the fullness of the muscle. You want that, you don't want it super, super long, because then they're liable to have a longer, leaner muscle type. You don't want it super, super short, because then they're not going to have any, it's just going to look like a bubble back there. So you want a decent, not that that's any sort of indicator, but you want a decent length to it so it flows nice into this leg. I wish this guy's tail was up because that would help. Does that answer the question? Does that help? I hope. But a judge, that's where they're mainly where they're going to put their hands is right back here in this. So some of them will talk about the twist, some of them won't. It just kind of depends on your judge. It depends on how long they've been in the industry. I don't remember when I was a kid judges talking about a twist as much as they do now. So the industry has changed a little bit.
Great. So it looks like we've got quite a few answers, and we do have to kick off here in just a minute or two to get swine rolling at 6 o'clock. So I don't know if you're willing to give them the correct placing. A lot of them are saying the same thing. A lot of them are saying 4, 2, 3, 1. One kid really likes 4 and she wants him. Then we've got somebody that flipped them and did a 2, 4, 3, 1.
Okay. All right. So why won't you go? Oh, now we're going to have to go through all of this. Sorry. We weren't sure if the, so everybody that placed it 4, 2, 3, 1, you get a 50 for the day. 50. Good job. So for any of you guys that have never been a part of a judging contest, this is how a judging contest is ran. 4 animals, a placing, and then these cuts, so for whoever flopped the 2 and the 4, you would have lost 4 points. So just like on your exams, you lose 2 points for the question that you didn't answer right, same kind of deal. When you mess them all up, it gets much more complicated. But I'm glad that you guys were all seeing it. That's excellent. And I think that's, other than my fun video or my fun comic, I think that's it. Hopefully I get to see all of you guys next week. We'll go over some more of the fitting and handling.
Yep, absolutely. So you guys, before we kick the meeting off here, within the next couple minutes, you should see Megan. Tell me if you can see the survey that's up on the screen. Fantastic. If you guys can please, it's just 5 quick questions. Let us know how you liked the workshop and everything like that. Megan's no longer a 4-H agent, so it's not quite, she doesn't necessarily absolutely have to have this, but we do want to know how you guys liked it. So if you can real quickly finish that off. And then, like I said, Megan is willing to share the PDF of this PowerPoint. So later tonight, after we wrap up our last session, which is swine tonight, I will work to email those out to everybody who registered. There is a question in regards to, Katie, you're asking about recordings, if there is one. So we are hoping, and again, this is with the permission of the presenters, that we have been recording this. We are hoping to be able to clean those videos up at some point and get them closed captioned and available for review for 4-H members in Colorado. I can't promise how fast that turnaround will be, just with how much we have going on, but it is a goal. So once we have those available, they will most likely be on the Colorado 4-H website, potentially, but we will let agents know where we'll post those. So, all right, guys, anybody else on the survey for us? And any last minute questions? Like Megan said, if you guys are doing the full series, if you're able to join us, GOATS is the next 2 Tuesdays, so we're switching to Tuesdays, and we will
Sorry, don't mind my dog.
at 5 o'clock. So if everybody could just say thank you to Megan, I'm going to stop the poll and I'm going to kick you out, but we really do appreciate, Megan, your time and sharing your expertise with all of us.
Of course. Hope to see you all next week.
Thanks, Megan.
Of course.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
You guys are welcome.
Bye, guys.